Ethan was 8 years old and carried an entire world inside him. While other children raced around the schoolyard, filling the air with their voices, he remained quiet, watching. It wasn't that he didn't want to join in. His heart yearned for the connection he saw blossoming around him, but the words simply wouldn't come. Selective mutism, as doctors had explained to his mother Sarah, was like an invisible door that closed between Ethan and the rest of the world whenever he was outside his family environment. At home with Sarah, he conversed, albeit in short sentences and a soft voice. At school, however, the silence was absolute. "Don't worry, he'll outgrow this," teachers would say, with that kind of smile that never reached their eyes. Sarah would smile back, but at night, while packing her son's backpack for the next day, her hands trembled slightly. That fall morning, as they walked to school, golden leaves danced around their feet. Ethan squeezed his mother's hand when they spotted the large green gate of Pinecrest Elementary School. "Today will be different," Sarah said, kneeling down to meet her son's amber eyes. "Remember what we talked about? About the field trip?" Ethan nodded. Ms. Reynolds had announced the previous week. The class would visit Clearwater Ranch, an equine therapy center on the outskirts of their small town of Meadow Springs. Sarah had cautiously explained to her son that horses were special animals, capable of understanding feelings without needing words. "You don't even need to talk to them," she had said. "They understand what's in here." And she gently touched her son's chest. When the yellow school bus parked in front of the school, Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He climbed the steps, holding tight to the strap of his blue backpack, choosing a window seat at the back. Ms. Reynolds smiled at him and made a discreet sign, asking if he was okay. He responded with a barely perceptible nod. As the bus wound through rural roads, Ethan pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Trees passed in blurs of green and gold, and the sky displayed a blue so deep it seemed impossible. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining what this place would be like, trying to form a mental image of the horses he would meet. What he didn't know, as the bus climbed the hill leading to the ranch, was that this day would mark the beginning of a journey that would change much more than just his silence. Clearwater Ranch appeared on the horizon like a painting, a main house of light wood, well-kept stables, white fences, and in the background mountains of deep green that seemed to touch the sky. When the bus stopped in the gravel parking lot, a tall man wearing a cowboy hat with a broad smile was already waiting for the group. "Welcome." His voice was deep and warm like the afternoon sun. "My name's Jack, and I'm in charge of this place. I'm really happy to have you all here today." The children descended from the bus in a cheerful confusion of voices and laughter. Ethan was the last one, measuring each step, his eyes scanning the location with silent curiosity. Jack gathered the group in a semicircle and began explaining the basic rules of the ranch. No running near the animals, no loud noises, always follow instructions. Throughout the explanation, his eyes met Ethan's several times, as if he noticed something special in that quiet boy. "Equine therapy," Jack explained, "is a type of therapy that uses horses to help people. Horses have an incredible gift. They can sense how we feel inside even when we don't say anything." Ethan looked up upon hearing this, meeting Jack's gaze. The group was divided into small teams, each accompanied by an instructor. Ethan was paired with Abby, a young woman with hair tied in a long braid and a gentle smile. She didn't try to force him to speak, just extended her hand and waited until he, hesitantly, held it. "I'm going to introduce you to someone very special," she said, as they walked toward one of the stables. "His name is Stormwind." The stable had a sweet smell of fresh hay, and something else Ethan couldn't identify. It was an earthy, living aroma. Inside the last stall, a reddish-brown horse with a long black mane turned its head toward them. Stormwind was smaller than the other horses Ethan had seen when they arrived. He wasn't an imposing or majestic horse like in movies, but there was something in his eyes, large, dark, and deep, that made the boy's heart beat faster. "He was rescued 3 years ago," Abby explained in a low voice, as if sharing a secret. "He was scared and distrustful, like many of us become when we go through difficult times. It took him a while to trust people again, but today, he's our best therapist." Ethan approached the stall slowly. Stormwind tilted his head, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air in the boy's direction. "You can extend your hand like this," Abby demonstrated, with her palm open and facing up. "Let him come to you." Ethan imitated the gesture, his small arm stretched out, trembling slightly. For a moment that seemed eternal. Stormwind just observed. Then, with surprising gentleness for such a large animal, he approached and touched his muzzle to Ethan's palm. The contact was like a warm electric current running through the boy's entire body. Something inexplicable happened in that moment, a silent connection, a mutual recognition between two souls who understood the value of silence and the language of subtle gestures. Abby watched amazed as the horse and boy seemed to converse without words. She had seen the therapeutic power of animals many times, but there was something especially touching about this encounter. "I think you two have a lot to say to each other," she murmured, and for the first time that day a genuine smile lit up Ethan's face. In the weeks that followed, the visit to the ranch transformed into a regular program for Ethan. Sarah, seeing how animated her son had returned from that first encounter, had approached Jack to ask about regular equine therapy sessions. The price was a challenge for a single mother who worked as a nurse at the small-town hospital, but Jack, after learning more about their situation, offered a special program. Ethan could come to the ranch on Saturdays, helping with small tasks in exchange for time with Stormwind. And so every Saturday morning, mother and son traveled the road leading to Clearwater Ranch. Sarah watched from a distance as Ethan helped clean the stalls, fill the water troughs, and sort the hay, all in silence, but with a concentration and dedication she rarely saw in him. "He's different," Sarah commented to Jack one Saturday, as they observed Ethan carefully brushing Stormwind's coat. "More present." Jack nodded, resting his arms on the wooden fence. "Horses have that effect on people. They demand complete presence. You can't be with a horse and think about 1,000 things at once. They bring us into the moment, but he still doesn't talk at school," Sarah sighed. "His teacher says he remains completely silent. Some processes are like underground rivers," Jack replied, his eyes following the calm, rhythmic movements Ethan made with the brush. "We don't see what happens beneath the surface, but that doesn't mean there's no movement." In the stable, Ethan worked with serene concentration. Stormwind remained still, occasionally turning his head to observe the boy. There was a silent communication between them, a dialogue made of small gestures, breaths, and glances. Sometimes Ethan would talk to Stormwind in almost inaudible whispers. He'd tell him about his day at school, about how difficult it was when everyone expected him to answer questions, about how his throat seemed to close up when he tried to speak in front of others. "You understand, don't you?" he murmured one afternoon while caressing the horse's muzzle. "What it's like when words get stuck." Stormwind responded with a slight movement of his head, his dark eyes fixed on the boy. Abby, who coordinated the therapy sessions, began introducing simple exercises. First, Ethan would just walk alongside Stormwind, holding the reins. Later, with help, he would mount the horse and be led around the riding ring in slow circles. "Feel his movement," Abby instructed. "Breathe together." Ethan would close his eyes as Stormwind walked, absorbing the rhythm of hooves against the ground, the sway of the animal's body, the warmth emanating from him. It was as if they were dancing an ancient dance, a communication that came from something much deeper than words. One Saturday, when the session was ending, Ethan did something unexpected. He leaned forward and hugged Stormwind's neck, burying his face in the soft black mane. "Thank you," he whispered, for only the horse to hear. That night during dinner, Ethan asked his mother in his usual quiet voice, "How did Stormwind come to the ranch?" Sarah almost dropped her fork, surprised by the spontaneous question. Ethan rarely initiated conversations. "I don't know, sweetheart. We can ask Jack next Saturday." Ethan nodded, turning his attention back to his plate, but something had changed, like a small sprout emerging through the earth after a long winter. Fall was advancing, painting the mountains around Meadow Springs with golden and red hues. At Clearwater Ranch, Jack gathered his small team for a serious conversation. Among them were Abby, Dr. Tom, the veterinarian who cared for the animals, and some regular volunteers. "The financial situation isn't good," Jack explained, running his hand through his graying hair. "The subsidized equine therapy program is costing more than we can sustain." "But we can't just stop," Abby argued. "There are children who depend on these sessions. They're making real progress." Jack nodded, his face tired. "I know. That's why I thought of a temporary solution, the Regional Equestrian Festival, 2 months from now. The prize for the most inspiring presentation could give us some financial breathing room." The idea was bold: prepare some of the equine therapy participants for a simple presentation at the festival. It would be an opportunity to showcase the ranch's work, raise community awareness, and hopefully attract new sponsors. Which children do you think could participate? Dr. Tom asked, already thinking about the practical aspects. Abby didn't hesitate. Ethan, for sure. His connection with Stormwind is extraordinary. Jack frowned. But he doesn't speak in public. A presentation would require... Not necessarily, Abby interrupted, her eyes shining. The presentation could be precisely about that. Communication without words, showing how horses and humans can understand each other beyond verbal language. The meeting continued, with the team discussing the details. In the end, they decided they would invite 3 children to participate, including Ethan if he and his mother agreed. The following Saturday, while Ethan was brushing Stormwind, Jack and Abby approached Sarah, who was watching her son from the rest area. "We have a proposal," Jack began, explaining about the festival and the presentation idea. "It would be an incredible experience for Ethan, but we completely understand if you think it's too much for him right now." Sarah bit her lip, her eyes returning to her son, who, oblivious to the conversation, continued his ritual of caring for Stormwind. "He would feel a lot of pressure," she said finally. "Presentations, crowds. These are exactly the kind of situations that trigger his anxiety." Abby nodded, understanding. "I know, but it could also be an opportunity for him to show that there are other forms of communication, equally valid. The presentation would be adapted for him, not the other way around." Sarah promised to think about it and, more importantly, to talk to Ethan about it. That night, during dinner, she carefully introduced the topic. To her surprise, Ethan didn't immediately reject the idea. His eyes widened with fear. Yes, but there was something else there. A curiosity, perhaps even a desire. "It would just be you and Stormwind," Sarah explained, "showing what you already do together." "Would there be many people?" Ethan asked, his voice so low that Sarah had to lean in to hear. "Yes, some, but they would be there to admire, not to judge." Ethan remained silent for a long moment, moving food around on his plate. "Can I think about it?" "Of course you can, my love. All the time you need." The next morning, upon waking, Sarah found a small note on the kitchen table, written in Ethan's irregular handwriting, "I want to try. For Stormwind." The next Saturday, when they arrived at the ranch, Ethan ran, something rare for him, directly to Stormwind's stable. The horse greeted him with a soft neigh, as if he knew something important was about to happen. "We're going to be in the festival," Ethan whispered, hugging the animal's neck. "Together." And so began a new phase in Ethan's journey, preparation for a challenge that would test not only his connection with Stormwind, but his courage to show himself to the world, even without words. Training for the festival began with small steps. Abby developed a simple routine that highlighted the natural harmony between Ethan and Stormwind. It wasn't about elaborate tricks or acrobatics. The focus was silent communication, the subtle dance between a boy who didn't speak and a horse that understood what was beyond words. "Think of it as telling a story without using your voice," Abby explained to Ethan as they worked in the circular riding ring. "Your movements, the way you look at Stormwind, how you move together, all of that speaks." The first sessions were challenging. Ethan, accustomed only to the calm presence of Abby and occasionally Jack during his encounters with Stormwind, now needed to get used to other gazes. Dr. Tom, the veterinarian, frequently observed the training sessions. Sometimes other ranch employees stopped to watch. Each new pair of eyes was like a small test for Ethan. His body would tense, his movements would lose their natural fluidity. Stormwind, sensitive to the changes in the boy, also responded with hesitation. "It's okay," Abby would assure him when she noticed the tension rising. "Take a deep breath. Remember, what matters is what happens between you and Stormwind. The rest is just scenery." Slowly, Ethan began to find a bubble of concentration, a mental space where only he and the horse existed. When he entered this state, it was as if a silent music guided them. The routine they developed was simple, but deeply touching for those who watched. It began with Ethan entering the ring alone, calling Stormwind with just a gentle hand gesture. The horse, free at the other end, would come to him in a calm trot. Then, without using reins or any equipment beyond a light halter, Ethan would guide Stormwind in circles, just with subtle body movements and glances. The most impressive part came next. Ethan would position himself in the center of the ring and, using only body language, make Stormwind circle around him, changing direction or speed according to almost imperceptible signals. "It's like they're reading each other's minds," Dr. Tom commented after a particularly fluid session. As the weeks passed, Jack began bringing small groups of visitors to watch the training sessions. First 2 or 3 people, then slightly larger groups. It was a gradual exposure that tested Ethan's limits, but also helped him build confidence. At home, Sarah noticed subtle changes. Ethan began making more eye contact during conversations. His shoulders seemed less tense. One afternoon, he came home from school with a small smile. The teacher asked if I wanted to present my drawing to the class today, he told her during dinner. And what did you do? Sarah asked, trying not to show how much her heart accelerated with this simple sentence. I didn't speak, Ethan replied, but I raised the drawing and showed it to everyone. Sarah felt tears forming, but held them back. That's wonderful, Ethan. How did you feel? He thought for a moment, playing with his fork. Scared. Then good. Like when I'm with Stormwind and other people come to watch. The comparison didn't go unnoticed. What Ethan was learning at the ranch was slowly overflowing into other areas of his life. One Saturday morning, just 3 weeks before the festival, something unexpected happened during training. Jack had brought a small group of potential sponsors, 5 well-dressed adults who observed with professional interest. In the middle of the presentation, one of the visitors received a call and answered his cell phone, speaking loudly. The sudden sound startled Stormwind, who took a step back, snorting nervously. Ethan, instead of being startled too, as would have happened just a few months earlier, remained calm. He looked directly into Stormwind's eyes and extended his hand, breathing deeply. The horse hesitated for a second, but then approached, pressing his muzzle against the boy's palm. The moment was so powerful that even the man on the phone noticed, apologizing and ending the call. When the routine ended, the entire group spontaneously applauded. Later, while Ethan was helping brush Stormwind after training, Jack approached. You were amazing today, Ethan. The way you calmed Stormwind. He crouched to be at eye level with the boy. Did you know that for a long time after he came here, Stormwind was afraid of adult men, especially when they spoke loudly? We never found out exactly what happened to him before, but something hurt him. Ethan stopped brushing, his hand resting on the horse's neck. How did he get better? He asked, genuinely curious. Jack smiled. The same way you're getting better, one day at a time, finding people to trust, realizing that not everyone will hurt him. He paused. Stormwind found safety here, and I think you have too, haven't you? Ethan nodded, returning to brushing the horse's gleaming coat. There was a mutual understanding between animal and boy that went beyond words, an understanding of what it's like to carry invisible fears and still find the courage to move forward. The festival was approaching rapidly, and with it, the biggest challenge Ethan had ever faced. It was a week before the festival when the unthinkable happened. Ethan and Sarah had just arrived at the ranch that Saturday morning when they noticed unusual activity. Dr. Tom was hurriedly leaving Stormwind's stable, carrying his medical bag. What happened? Sarah asked, holding Ethan by the shoulders as he watched the scene with wide eyes. Stormwind has a fever, Jack explained, approaching with a tense face. We noticed last night that he wasn't eating well, and this morning his temperature was high. Is it serious? The concern in Sarah's voice reflected the growing panic in Ethan's eyes. Dr. Tom, who joined the conversation, tried to sound reassuring. We're still investigating. It might just be a mild infection, but we need to be cautious. Horses can deteriorate quickly when they get sick. Can I see him? Ethan's voice was almost inaudible, but everyone turned. Surprised that he had spoken spontaneously in the presence of so many people, Dr. Tom and Jack exchanged quick glances. I think so, the veterinarian answered after a moment. But we can't let him get too agitated. Quick visit, okay? Ethan nodded seriously, as if he perfectly understood the responsibility he was assuming. Inside the stable, the difference was evident. Normally alert and interested, Stormwind was lying on the straw, his breathing a bit faster than normal. When he saw Ethan, however, he raised his head and emitted a soft neigh. Hey, buddy, Ethan whispered, approaching slowly. Jack stayed at the stall door, watching carefully as the boy knelt near the horse's head. For 15 minutes, Ethan remained there, sometimes gently caressing Stormwind's neck, sometimes just sitting in silence. There was no desperation in his posture, just a calm presence, as if he were transmitting strength to the animal. When he finally left, his eyes were moist, but his voice was firm when he asked Dr. Tom, will he get better? We're doing everything we can, the veterinarian answered honestly. The next few days will be important. In the days that followed, Ethan created a new routine. After school, he convinced Sarah to take him to the ranch for short visits. He brought books and, sitting near Stormwind's stall, read in a low voice, practice for the presentation that everyone was beginning to suspect wouldn't happen. "We need to think of alternatives for the festival," Jack commented to Abby 3 days later, as they watched Ethan reading to the sick horse. "Maybe one of the other participants could—" "Wait," Abby interrupted. "Look, inside the stall, something remarkable was happening." Stormwind, who had remained mostly lying down in recent days, was now standing, his head lowered near Ethan, as if absorbing every word. Dr. Tom, who arrived for the nightly checkup, was surprised by the improvement. "The fever has dropped significantly," he announced after examining the animal, "and his appetite seems to be returning." "What do you think happened?" Jack asked quietly, as they watched Ethan helping to prepare Stormwind's food. Dr. Tom smiled. "Veterinary medicine has its limitations. There are things we can't fully explain, like the effect of emotional bonds on physical recovery." In the following days, Stormwind's improvement continued. His energy gradually returned, and with it, the hope that maybe, just maybe, the presentation at the festival might still be possible. 2 days before the event, however, Dr. Tom called a serious meeting with Jack, Abby, Sarah, and Ethan. "Stormwind is much better," the veterinarian began, choosing his words carefully. "But he's not 100% yet. Participating in the festival would represent considerable effort." "Then we can't do it," Sarah immediately concluded, looking at her son with concern. "I'm not saying it's impossible," Dr. Tom clarified, "just that we need to be realistic about the risks. A simplified routine, less time, it might be viable." All eyes turned to Ethan, who had remained extraordinarily calm throughout the entire crisis. The boy who once shrank when many people observed him was now sitting upright, thoughtful. "What if," he began, hesitant but determined, "what if we change what we're going to do, something more calm?" Abby leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of thing are you thinking about, Ethan?" "No running or making circles," Ethan explained, his eyes fixed on his own hands. "Just to being together, showing how we understand each other." A plan began to take shape. Instead of the dynamic routine they had practiced, Ethan and Stormwind would do a more contemplative presentation, focused on the silent connection that was, after all, the true essence of their bond. "We can still withdraw if Stormwind isn't well on the morning of the festival," Dr. Tom warned. "His health comes first." Everyone agreed, especially Ethan, who nodded seriously. "I just want him to be okay." On the eve of the festival, after a final visit to the ranch, Sarah found Ethan sitting on his bed, looking out the window at the starry sky. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" she asked, sitting beside him. Ethan thought for a moment. "A little, but what, honey?" "I think Stormwind and we understand each other, even when it's hard." Sarah hugged her son, fighting against the emotion that tightened her throat. In a few months, this silent boy had found a voice, not necessarily the one the world expected, but one that was authentically his. "No matter what happens tomorrow," she said softly, "I'm so proud of you." That night, as Ethan fell asleep, a light rain began to fall, drumming on the roof, a soft rhythm like horse hooves trotting on firm ground, a sign, perhaps, of the day that would follow. The morning of the festival arrived with a clear sky and a gentle sun, the kind of day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Meadow Springs Community Park, normally a peaceful space, had been transformed into a vibrant celebration of the equestrian world. Colorful tents dotted the field, small flags danced in the breeze, and the aroma of food mingled with the sweet smell of fresh grass. Sarah parked the car in the area designated for participants, watching Ethan from the corner of her eye. He was quiet, but not in the tense way of before. It was a contemplative quietness, as if he were gathering inner strength. "Ready?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, grabbing the small backpack where he had stored some special items for Stormwind, a favorite brush, a perfectly red apple. When they reached the area reserved for Clearwater Ranch competitors, they found Jack helping unload equipment from a pickup truck. His face lit up when he saw them. "Ethan, we were just talking about you," he said, approaching with a broad smile. "Dr. Tom was here earlier. He checked Stormwind again and says he's ready, as long as we keep things simple." Ethan visibly relaxed at this news. He had been carrying a worry that even his mother hadn't fully perceived. Abby led them to a small tent, where Stormwind was resting in a temporary enclosure. The horse looked much better, alert with bright eyes, though still not at his usual energy level. When he saw Ethan, he emitted a soft neigh and moved toward the fence. The festival program was packed with various competitions and demonstrations: jumping, dressage, western riding. Clearwater Ranch's presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. as part of the Community Impact segment that highlighted therapeutic and educational programs. As the day progressed, Sarah noticed that Ethan was absorbing everything with unusual openness. He watched the other presentations attentively, quietly observing the different ways humans and horses work together. Occasionally, he would point at something that caught his attention or squeeze her hand when a particularly beautiful horse passed by. When lunchtime came, to everyone's surprise, Ethan asked if he could eat with Abby and the other children who would be presenting with Clearwater Ranch. It was the first time he had willingly sought out the company of peers in a social setting. "Of course," Sarah said, trying to hide her amazement. "I'll be right over there if you need me." From a distance, she watched as her son sat quietly with the small group. He didn't speak much, but his body language was more relaxed than she'd seen in public in years. As the time for their presentation approached, Ethan and Abby went to prepare Stormwind. They had decided on minimal equipment, just a simple halter with a blue ribbon attached. No saddle, no elaborate decorations. The focus would be the connection, not the spectacle. Jack found Sarah watching the presentation before theirs, a demonstration of precision riding by a group of teenagers. "Nervous?" he asked, leaning against the fence next to her. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not in the way I used to be. Before, I was afraid he would never find his place in the world. Now I'm just hoping the world is ready to see him as he is." Jack smiled. "The people who matter will see." At 10 minutes to 2, announcements began for Clearwater Ranch's presentation. A crowd had gathered around the smaller exhibition ring, not enormous, but substantial enough to be intimidating. "Our next presentation," the announcer's voice boomed, "comes from Clearwater Ranch's therapeutic riding program. These young riders face challenges most of us never encounter, yet they've found connection and growth through the special bond with horses. Please welcome our young riders and their equine partners." 2 presentations preceded Ethan's. First, a young girl with Down syndrome who demonstrated simple riding skills with remarkable grace. Then a teenage boy recovering from a traumatic injury who showed his progress in regaining balance and coordination. The audience responded warmly to both, with enthusiastic applause and encouraging cheers. Then came Ethan's turn. The announcer's voice softened slightly. "Our final presentation today is unique. It demonstrates the power of non-verbal communication between a boy and a horse who both found their voices in silence. Please welcome 8-year-old Ethan and his partner Stormwind." The small gate to the ring opened, and Ethan walked in alone. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a blue button-up shirt, and boots that Jack had lent him for the occasion. The crowd quieted, perhaps sensing that this was different from what they had seen before. Ethan walked to the center of the ring and stopped. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his back to the entrance gate. Then, without turning, he raised his hand slightly, a gesture so subtle many might have missed it. From the holding area, Stormwind entered. There were no handlers, no guide ropes. The horse simply walked in at his own pace, steady and deliberate, heading directly toward the small figure in the center of the ring. A murmur passed through the crowd. This was unusual. Horses typically needed guidance in such open, unfamiliar spaces, with so many people around. Stormwind reached Ethan and stopped, lowering his head to touch the boy's shoulder gently. Ethan turned and placed his forehead against the horse's muzzle, his hand coming up to rest on the animal's cheek. For several breaths, they simply stood that way, completely still, as if having a silent conversation that no one else could hear. Then, in a movement that seemed choreographed, yet utterly natural, Ethan began walking. Stormwind matched his pace precisely, staying at his shoulder. They walked a slow circle around the ring, occasionally stopping. When they did, Ethan would gesture in small, almost imperceptible ways, and Stormwind would respond, lowering his head, lifting a front hoof, turning in place. No voice commands, no visible cues that could explain how the horse knew what to do, just a silent, perfect synchronicity. Near the center of the ring, Ethan stopped and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small apple. He held it up, showing it to Stormwind, who nickered softly. Then, in a gesture full of trust, Ethan placed the apple on the ground and backed away several steps. Stormwind remained still, waiting. The audience was completely silent now, collectively holding their breath. Ethan raised his hand slightly, and the horse approached the apple but didn't take it. Instead, he nudged it with his nose, rolling it back toward the boy. A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the audience. This wasn't in the routine they had practiced. It was Stormwind making a choice, playing, connecting in his own way. Ethan's face broke into a grin. He picked up the apple, took a small bite, and then offered the rest to Stormwind, who took it gently from his hand. For their final act, Ethan did something they hadn't rehearsed. He put his arms around Stormwind's neck in a hug, and then, to the astonishment of everyone who knew him, he whispered something into the horse's ear. It wasn't audible to the audience, but the intent was clear. A private message, a thank you perhaps, from one friend to another. As they walked side by side toward the exit gate, the crowd remained silent for a heartbeat, and then erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite appreciation, it was the kind of response that comes when people witness something authentically moving. Sarah, standing at the gate with Abby and Jack, had tears streaming down her face. Ethan emerged from the ring, his hand still resting on Stormwind's neck, and for the first time that day he looked overwhelmed, not by fear, but by the unfamiliar experience of being truly seen. The days following the festival brought a whirlwind of changes to Clearwater Ranch. The story of the silent boy and the rescue horse, who communicated without words, had captured more than just the audience that day. A local newspaper reporter had been present and written a feature article that was picked up by several regional publications. "The Strength of Silence," the headline read, accompanied by a photograph of Ethan with his arms around Stormwind's neck, their foreheads touching. The article praised the therapeutic programs at Clearwater Ranch and highlighted the special connection between the boy and horse as a reminder that communication transcends spoken language. Donations began arriving, modest amounts from individuals touched by the story, substantial checks from local businesses, and even a significant grant from a foundation dedicated to supporting innovative therapy programs. Jack, overwhelmed by the response, had to bring in a part-time administrator to help manage the sudden growth. For Ethan, the changes were more subtle, but equally profound. The Monday after the festival, Sarah walked him to school as usual. At the gate, instead of his customary anxious hesitation, he squeezed her hand once and then walked in with measured steps. Not confident exactly, but somehow more at peace with his place in the world. His teacher called Sarah that evening, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "Something's different," she said. "He raised his hand in class today. He didn't speak when I called on him, but he pointed to the answer in his workbook. It's a start." Over the following months, Ethan's relationship with Stormwind deepened. The regular Saturday sessions continued, now supplemented by a Tuesday afternoon program that Jack had created for children who showed special potential in equine therapy. Winter came to Meadow Springs, covering the landscape in a blanket of snow. The work at the ranch adapted to the season. More indoor sessions, special blankets for the horses, hot chocolate for the children after riding in the cold. One Tuesday in February, as snow fell gently outside the indoor arena, Abby was working with Ethan on a new exercise when Jack approached with a visitor, a tall woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Ethan, this is Dr. Miller," Jack said. "She's a specialist in communication therapy who's interested in our program." Dr. Miller smiled warmly. "I've heard wonderful things about you and Stormwind," she said, her voice gentle. "Would it be okay if I watched you work together today?" Ethan looked at Stormwind as if consulting him, then nodded. His acceptance of observers had grown steadily since the festival, though he still preferred smaller audiences. After the session, Dr. Miller spoke with Sarah while Ethan helped groom Stormwind. "I've been developing a program that combines traditional speech therapy with animal-assisted techniques," she explained. "What I've seen today confirms my belief that this approach could be revolutionary for children like Ethan." She proposed a collaboration, a small pilot program at Clearwater Ranch, bringing together communication specialists and equine therapists. Ethan would be one of 5 children participating, if Sarah agreed. "It's not about forcing speech," Dr. Miller clarified. "It's about creating bridges between different forms of expression. We recognize that verbal communication isn't the only valid type, but we can help children find whatever voice works best for them." By spring, the program was underway. Twice a week, Ethan worked with both Abby and a speech therapist named Mark. who had a special gift for connecting with reluctant communicators. The therapy sessions were carefully structured, but felt like play, games that strengthened Ethan's confidence in expressing himself, sometimes with words, sometimes without. On a warm day in April, Sarah arrived early to pick up Ethan and found herself watching from a distance as he completed his session. She could hear his voice, still quiet, but steady, as he gave Stormwind simple commands. "Walk on. Whoa. Good boy." Jack appeared beside her, leaning against the fence. "He's finding his way," he said. Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I used to think success meant he would overcome his mutism completely, that one day he'd just start talking normally to everyone. And now? Now I understand it's about him finding his comfort, his confidence. His voice might always be quieter than others, and that's okay." In May, Clearwater Ranch hosted an open house to showcase their expanded programs. Dozens of families from surrounding communities came to learn about equine therapy and watch demonstrations from current participants. To everyone's surprise, Ethan volunteered to help introduce visitors to the therapy horses. Standing beside Stormwind's stall, he didn't give elaborate explanations. Instead, he showed each group how to approach, how to offer their hand, how to listen to what the horse was communicating through ear movements and body language. When a young girl, perhaps 5 years old, appeared frightened of Stormwind's size, Ethan knelt down to her level. "He's scared sometimes too," he said, his voice soft but clear. "We all are." The words were simple, but they reached the girl. She stepped forward, her small hand extended just as Ethan had demonstrated, and smiled with delight when Stormwind gently lowered his head to greet her. As summer approached, bringing with it the anniversary of Ethan's first visit to the ranch, Jack announced a special celebration. The Year of Voices event would honor the achievements of all the children in their programs, showcasing the many different ways they had learned to express themselves. The day of the celebration dawned bright and clear. The ranch was decorated with colorful streamers and hand-painted signs created by the children. Families, supporters, and community members gathered on blankets and folding chairs around the main outdoor arena. Each child had chosen their own way to participate. Some rode in group formations, others showcased individual skills they'd mastered. One boy who struggled with physical coordination but loved music played guitar while his therapy horse stood calmly beside him. When it was Ethan's turn, he entered the ring leading Stormwind with just a loose rope. They positioned themselves in the center, and Ethan turned to face the audience. "My name is Ethan," he said, his voice amplified by the small microphone Jack had given him. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. "This is my friend, Stormwind. Before I met him, I thought being quiet meant I had nothing to say. Now I know that wasn't true." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Some days words are still hard for me, but Stormwind taught me that's okay. There are many ways to speak." With that, he removed the rope from Stormwind's halter completely. For the next few minutes, they demonstrated their silent communication, moving together in perfect harmony, each subtle shift in Ethan's body immediately understood and responded to by the horse. Then came the moment that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Ethan stood still, and Stormwind circled slowly around him. As the horse completed the circle, Ethan spoke again, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet arena. "Sometimes the most important things are felt, not heard. But today I wanted you to hear me say thank you. To my mum, who never stopped believing in me. To Jack and Abby, who showed me this new world. To Dr. Tom, who helped Stormwind when he was sick. And most of all to Stormwind, who heard me even when I couldn't speak." The applause that followed wasn't just for the performance. It was for the journey, for the courage it took for this quiet boy to find and share his voice in whatever form it took. That evening, as the celebration wound down and the last visitors departed, Ethan sat with Sarah on the porch of the ranch house. In the paddock nearby, Stormwind grazed peacefully, occasionally raising his head to check on his young human friend. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice taking on the thoughtful tone that had become more common lately. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think there are other kids like me, who need to find their own way to speak?" Sarah considered the question. "I think there are all kinds of people in the world who aren't heard the way they should be. People who communicate differently, or who haven't found the right ears to listen to them yet." Ethan nodded, watching Stormwind. "I want to help them," he said simply. Sarah put her arm around her son's shoulders, marveling at how much had changed in a year. The boy who once shrank from the world was now thinking about how he could reach out to others, how his experience might help light the way for someone else. Jack stepped onto the porch, carrying mugs of hot chocolate. "What are you two deep thinkers pondering over here?" "The future," Sarah answered, accepting a mug with a smile. "Big topic," Jack said, sitting down beside them. Ethan took a sip of his chocolate before responding. "I was just thinking that maybe someday when I'm older I could work here, help other kids who are quiet like me." "I think that would be wonderful," Jack replied, his voice warm with genuine approval. "The world needs more people who understand the value of listening, really listening beyond just words." As twilight deepened into dusk, the three sat in comfortable silence, watching Stormwind in the paddock. The horse had found a patch of particularly sweet grass and was contentedly munching, his ears occasionally flicking in their direction as if keeping track of the conversation. There would be challenges ahead, Sarah knew. Ethan's journey was far from complete. There would be new schools, new social situations, days when the words would still refuse to come. But something fundamental had changed, both in how Ethan saw himself and in how he approached these challenges. He had found his voice, not just in the words he could now sometimes speak, but in the deeper understanding that communication came in many forms, and that being heard and understood didn't always require sound. As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Ethan leaned against his mother's shoulder, comfortable in the silence they shared. Across the paddock, Stormwind raised his head one last time, looking directly at the boy, their connection as clear and strong as ever, a silent conversation that had changed both their lives. Some bonds, after all, need no words at all. My friends, we've come to the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.